How does that look with me in there, Pat? Would it actually...
Oh, it's so much worse now.
What's going on, folks? Nate here at Tool Dyno Works. We are actually not in the dyno room today. We are in the shop with my good friend Mark Price and our 2025 Z900 and our 2024 MT-09 to once and for all settle the great debate of which of these two bikes is better. On our social media platforms last week that we went ahead and sent Mark out here with both of these bikes to collect some pretty objective and empirical, completely unbiased data. You don't own either of these bikes, and you're not affiliated with Team Green or the Blue Crew in any way, shape, or form, correct?
Correct.
Perfect.
Yes.
So now we chose Mark to go ahead and do this for us because he is not only a fellow data nerd, but an incredibly accomplished and experienced racer himself. Real quick, Mark, for those of you that have not heard of our friend Mark Price here, just tell these guys real quick what you've done and what you do that kind of made you more uniquely equipped to ride these more hooligan-esque motorcycles we've got here.
Sure, yeah. So as you know, I participated in the 2023 Super Hooligan National Championship with Moto America and did pretty well. We got a third place at Daytona.
Yep.
To start the season off on the box, which was great. And we were able to finish 5th overall for the season. So we beat everybody but Factory Indian and an Energica team.
And you did that completely on a 100% privateer budget.
Correct.
Pretty much out of your garage.
100%. I built the bike. I did everything to the bike. I rode the bike, crew chiefed the bike. So yeah, that was out of my one stall garage in Seattle.
So that definitely makes him uniquely qualified to go ahead and provide data and feedback on both these bikes. And we're going to really just dive in now to kind of the raw data and what he's found and what we found here with our experience tuning these bikes in our own track testing.
So the first thing is, these are both fantastic motorcycles.
Yeah.
I think this is a reflection of how hard it is to buy a bad bike in 2025. These are both a ton of fun. They're great bikes. I enjoyed riding both of them thoroughly.
Good.
So let's start with that baseline, and then we can get into some of the comparisons, some of the nitty-gritty. So I think before we talk about the objective perspective of the data, I think that I'd like to share some subjective observations
For sure.
that I had when we were riding the bikes.
Go for it.
So, completely different characters. So we've got a super torquey, super fun, super engaging triple, and we've got an inline four, which is great. It's fantastic, but it doesn't quite have the excitement.
Sure.
When you twist the throttle of that instant torque, that really playfulness of the engine.
Just a little less character than this.
A little less character, yeah. However, this has a fantastic connection with your brake lever, with your fork, with the chassis, that I really understand what the front end is doing on corner entry, as we're releasing the brakes and as we're starting to go back to the throttle. I really enjoyed that feeling with the Z900. MT-09, a little bit less so.
Sure.
Brake feel was a little bit more wooden. And there just wasn't that connection with, I squeeze harder, I slow down harder, the fork moves the way that I expect it to through the stroke.
So just a little bit less of a linear connection with the front end of the brakes on the MT-09 than the Z900.
Exactly, exactly. Now, we're talking stock to stock.
Correct.
So we're not going to get into, well, if we just did this or we just did that to fix it.
Exactly.
So we're going to keep the conversation stock to stock.
Right.
With some fantastic tuning and a little bit of extra power.
We will mention, just so there is no, that's not an apples to oranges or apples to apples comparison on these bikes, the Z900 we have here is the SE. So this does have the slightly up-spec front suspension and brakes on this bike, whereas the MT-09 is the base model MT-09. It's not the SP. Now, we know the improvements that the SP provides on this bike, so here at the end of the video, we'll kind of level the playing field a little bit with that information, but for the moment, just keep in mind that there is some slight differences in terms of the spec of these two bikes, but for all intents and purposes here with the data, this is still a very, very comparable setup.
Some other subjective impressions. We've kind of got a blipper problem with the Kawasaki.
Yes.
You know, we see this on some of their other products,
Yep.
is that the quick shifting and the blipping just isn't quite there. And
Correct.
I think we have the same situation here, is on entry, going to the brakes, I got to make sure that I get my shifting done when I'm a little bit more straight up and down, or the bike feels like it's pushing me.
Right.
I'll let you take over and talk about the options to fix that.
That has been a characteristic problem on the Kawasaki throttle-by-wire systems now, really since about 2019, when they first came out with the ZX10 red top engines back there in like the Gen 5.5 setup. There's just a couple things missing in the Woolwich Racing software to be able to properly smooth that out yet on this bike. We fought that problem on the ZX10s for years, where all of a sudden you would turn off the deceleration fuel cut, which is a must-have to get the throttle to properly respond on both of these bikes. But on the Kawasaki in particular, the throttle-by-wire blip or open time is so long from the factory that with just that little bit of additional fuel on deceleration, it sort of pushes you. On the ZX10s, which are the same Mitsubishi ECU architecture that is used in this, and the ZX4, in the new Ninja 1100, in all their modern bikes now, we have the tables set up for the quick shifter and auto blipper so we can properly manipulate that, but not yet on these bikes. So I think that that is an issue that is probably very soon going to be addressed. The guys at Woolwich do a pretty darn good job of getting me additional bin file definition support that we need, and I've already requested that for this bike. Now, it's interesting that you gave that feedback, because on just my own riding, test riding this bike, not on the track, I didn't notice that as much. It seems like from your feedback that it's much more subtle on this bike than it was on the ZX10.
Yeah.
The ZX10 would like almost accelerate you through a corner when that was still a problem, and there was just absolutely no way you could ride the bike on the track that way.
No, and I did ride it around a little bit, and no problem whatsoever.
Right.
So and at a more casual pace, and some of the laps that we'll take a look at. We hit some lap traffic and weren't full out the whole time.
Right.
We didn't have the issue. So it's really track at a quicker pace that you're going to notice the difference.
Right. And again, when he says quicker pace, folks, the guy's been on the box at Daytona in the Super Hooligan class. So for 99% of folks out there, even if you're riding these bikes in an A group capacity to track it, this is an issue that somebody like Mark would be able to experience. I could probably detect it at a certain point as I was really pushing my own pace on these bikes. But again, worth noting, but not exactly a showstopper like it was in the prior Cowleys.
Yeah, and I'll go back to, these are both great motorcycles.
Right.
We're dealing with minutia.
Right.
Kind of coming back to chassis and some feel characteristics is with hooligan style bikes, these high bar bikes in general, because of where you sit, because of where the bars are, there's a little bit less weight over the front end. So we did see both of the bikes have a little bit of a lightness in the front end, particularly when changing direction, or like at our favorite racetrack that we go to all the time, and this test took place at the Ridge. We have some corners where we're at high throttle openings, reasonable lean angles, and the front starts to get light and move a little bit.
Yep.
So, but pretty even, pretty equal.
Did you notice that going up over through 9 and up over the hill at the Ridge?
Yeah. For anybody familiar with the Ridge, 910, yeah, we're starting to see some of that. One of the other bikes that I was testing that day with a little bit more horsepower.
Yeah, your speed triple.
We saw that a lot more. So it's kind of a characteristic of these types of motorcycles.
Yeah, you're sitting upright on these things. You're not leaned over in a super sport aggressive position, so it's really hard to weight the front end.
Yep.
I noticed exactly what Mark's talking about when I rode our MT-09 several times last season out at the Ridge. The very first time I went out there on a quick lap, not really knowing what to expect, going over turn 9 in the crest up over the top of the ridge there, it felt pretty much exactly like my KTM 890. Reminded me a lot of that, which are bikes that we also both own, where it's like, oh, the front wheel's in the air now as we're cresting over this hill. We really need to manage the throttle and keep this thing on the ground.
Or just anticipate a little bit, maybe a little rear brake in there, just to control it. But again, that's kind of
the nature of
the bikes.
Yeah.
I will say both of these have a little bit more sit-in than maybe the Dukes that we...
Right, we definitely sat on top of
a little
those.
bit more on top.
Yeah.
It's a little bit easier to adjust that.
Right.
Whereas these, I feel like you're sitting in the bike and you're a little bit locked in.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's... but I think same.
Yeah.
Very, very similar seating positions.
Right.
You know, when we're sort of evaluating things subjectively, one of the things that we go to is if I could change one thing
On which bike?
on each bike, or just talks about some like highlights and lowlights maybe.
Sure.
For sure, here, look,
Yes.
I feel like that's of the things that we could change.
Right.
Like that's what I would want to change.
Right.
On this bike, and on the Yamaha, brakes.
Yeah.
And maybe gearing.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit unsure which would help most.
Right.
And let's get into that a little bit with the power differences. Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed when I was riding was this. I mean, the straightaway is the Dyno with the Racetrack.
Correct.
Right. Is the characteristic of the MT-09 is I get up to speed and then we just kind of stop accelerating.
Right.
Like I'm just kind of sitting in fifth with the throttle open.
Right. Yep. Just waiting.
Just
waiting.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Turn one's coming.
Right.
The Z900 builds, right? And one I think is a little bit gearing. So the MT-09, I'm not able to use 6th gear.
Right. Not even close. Not in the ridge.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And
I couldn't
and
either.
that's a pretty significant straightaway.
Yes.
So and then the Z900, you know, I'm clicking the gears and it's accelerating, accelerating, accelerating.
Yeah.
And we'll look at the data for top speed.
Right.
But like, yeah, I mean,
The graph shows you everything.
this is
you need to
why.
see.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, you're talking about differences up here in the 9,000 RPM range of over 10 horsepower between the two bikes. At peak, it's slightly less substantial than that, you know, almost 118 in the configuration we have with the MT-09. And this is actually a good time to just really quickly highlight the configuration of both these bikes. They are as apples to apples as I can make them. There is really no significant intake modifications that can be done to this bike to improve it over stock on the intake side, whereas on the MT-09, the DNA Stage 2 kit is sort of the gold standard right now. That is even what a lot of the higher level teams are using on these bikes in the Hooligan series. It works fantastic. So we have the DNA Stage 2 kit on this bike. This is effectively a stock intake. This has the full SC Project exhaust installed, which is by tenths of a horsepower the best performing system currently on the market for these bikes. And we have the full Acra on this one, which is again by tenths of a horsepower the best performing system on these bikes. So there's an apples to apples bolt-on comparison going on here, and you can still see there's a huge difference between maximum power and both torque to the tire on these bikes.
Now, yeah, and I think gearing could help a little bit.
I agree.
On the track performance.
Right.
But yeah, 10 horsepower, you're never getting that back.
No, exactly. And again, we didn't change the gearing on either of these bikes. I'd already ridden this a ton of times out at the Ridge. I know that the gearing is a shortfall, but we left the gearing stock because again, this is as close to identical as possible, apples to apples comparisons we can get.
Yep.
So definitely on the gearing side of things, I would give the slight edge, I think, and you would agree, to the Cowie.
Yeah.
And in terms of outright just straightaway speed and performance.
Oh yeah,
There's no comparison.
Yeah.
Let's look at the data really quick that you collected so folks here can actually see what we're looking at in terms of your speed curves and of course at top speed as well out there at the ridge. So what are we looking at, Mark?
Yeah, so for folks that aren't familiar with data collection and data analysis, we'll kind of walk you through what this is.
Yep.
So first we can see is the track map. And this is the Ridge Motorsports Park in Shelton, Washington, where we do
The vast majority of our testing.
in Washington.
Yeah, it's 100 miles from our shop. It's very easy to get out there. And we both have thousands of laps around this place.
And it's a fantastic track. It's a national caliber track that Moto America comes to. So we also have a great benchmark.
Exactly.
You know, we know
the fastest guys in the country can do out here.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a huge benefit for us locally. So this is a speed and distance graph. So across the bottom we have from start finish, which is right about there.
Yep.
To start finish again, this is the GPS recorded speed of the motorcycles.
Yep.
So, and I mean, we are going to have to look at a couple laps with Kawasaki because we were out in a little bit slower session.
Right.
And encountering some lap traffic.
Difficult for guys like Mark or myself to get out there, especially on one of the first dry track day of the season, and not run into lap traffic when we're actually trying to put down fast laps. Because let's face it, a lot of the times those groups that these bikes belong in are swamped, and we're pushing them maybe at a little bit more of an aggressive pace and trying to be polite at the same time with our passing.
I think that's the key. Is we want to be good caretakers of the track experience for other folks.
Right.
So we try to create that.
Yep.
But I think that we've got some really good stories here. And one is, let's just talk about horsepower.
Yep.
So this is our exit from 16
Right.
onto the front straightaway.
Right.
And we can see the Yamaha starts accelerating a little bit earlier and a little bit harder, which is a reflection of some peg stuff, which we'll talk about in a second.
Yep.
And just kind of the easy to open the throttle characteristic of the engine. Jumps off the corner.
Right.
But pretty quickly, we see the Kawasaki just
run away. What speed was that where they finally sort of eclipsed each other there at the end of the lap when you're going down the straightaway?
Yeah, so that crossover point is right at, we're in kilometers.
Yeah, 158 kilometers an hour versus 159.
Yeah, so that's right as we start to separate, and then finally at the end of the straightaway, the top speed difference is
223 versus 217. It flipped over there the other side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's a huge top speed difference. Starting from the same place with the same drive on the same track. This is clearly these D900 outmotoring the MT-09.
It is 100% a faster motorcycle.
Yeah.
But let's take a look at a couple of other areas. So, we saw here, we said that the MT-09 is kind of jumping off the corner a little bit.
Right.
We see the same thing here.
Right.
This is 4.5. Right here.
Yep.
So we see we can get we're getting the Yamaha pointed a little bit earlier and accelerating a little bit earlier than we can with the Kawasaki. Right. So I'm going to turn another lap on so we can look at this is just lap traffic. Right. So let's take a look at
this. Is not a good representation of the two bikes because you had to slow down and behave.
Yeah. So let's look at Let's look at another lap and just focus in on these areas.
Yep.
And you know, we're seeing again, that's a gear change for the Yamaha,
Yep.
and the Kawasaki just starts to accelerate away. This is another. We're just carrying a little bit more speed, and we can see that the acceleration here is just. It's just faster.
Yeah.
It's just a faster bike.
And for those of you that aren't used to looking at the sort of Race Studio AIM data overlays here, these are hugely significant changes. I mean, you're talking several mile an hour in those areas. What corner are we looking at?
This is into 8,
Yep.
and this is another speed and also comfort. So I was much more comfortable using the brakes and using the front fork on the Kawasaki, which is why we see some of this separation here.
Exactly.
Yeah, and for like the hard numbers in terms of top speed, maximum top speed that we saw, you know, best we could do was 217 on the Yamaha, and best we saw was 223 on the Kawasaki. So
Yeah.
again, there's that huge split that we saw.
Right. And 6 kilometers an hour is really significant because, again, we're not talking about anything here other than just the raw power and the gearing of the bikes. They're both, from an aerodynamic standpoint, terrible to go down a straightaway. There is nothing keeping you from just getting beat up, wind in your chest. There is no real aerodynamics to these bikes. They're both wind sails. And the Z900 just pulls you faster for longer.
Yeah. I mean, what would one of the Moto America teams that you work with do for 6 kilometers an hour down the front straightaway?
They would happily write 5-figure checks all day long for 2 kilometers an hour, let alone 6.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just how big of a deal that is.
Exactly.
Now let's take a look at another aspect, which is the lean angle.
Right.
So that's another big difference between these two bikes.
A huge difference.
Yeah. So this is lean angle. Positive numbers are, I think, left. Negative numbers are right.
Yep.
One of the things that we can see is the Yamaha just peeking out.
Yeah, the piece
Some of
in
these
blue
higher-
are higher everywhere on the left-hand side.
Yeah, and that's foot pegs.
Yes.
Is we've got on the dash here we've got a lean angle indicator. Every time I rode it, I came in, it was 51 degrees and 51 degrees.
Right.
And that's it. That's all you get.
Right.
On the Yamaha, you know, we can pull up the data here. So this is maximum with the Kawasaki.
Yep.
51 and this is
49.
and 56 was what we saw
Yeah.
with the Yamaha. So that's 5 degrees of lean angle. That's pretty
Tremendous.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
So you can certainly get the MT-09 way further over on the edge of the tire than you can on the Z900.
Correct. Yeah.
And to achieve that 51 degrees that he saw on here, I will go ahead and show just a quick clip here. It was grinding away into the pavement pretty much everywhere when he was out there on the track.
Yeah, and you know, you start to notice this in some areas that are uncomfortable, and we'll see in the video. If you listen closely in the video, you can hear the peg hitting the ground in a couple of spots. And one of those spots was 10 up over the top of the hill there, where you're doing. Let's take a look.
Fast.
You know, we're doing 170 kilometers an hour with the foot peg colliding.
Just dug
with
into the ground.
Yeah, colliding with the curbing. So not very comfortable.
Right.
Yeah.
So, knowing what we know and knowing the data we've collected on these bikes, it really is kind of a mixed bag because the MT-09, there's no way around it, comes off a corner better and handles better. You can carry significantly more lean angle on this bike than you can on that bike. And out of pretty much every exit corner, you're coming off the corner faster on the MT-09.
Yep.
But this is faster in a straight line by a large margin.
Yep.
The brakes and suspension feel a little bit better on this, whereas you had a little bit more of that kind of disconnected vague sensation on that.
Yep.
So it is really tough to say, even just looking at the raw metrics, again, no subjective nonsense here whatsoever, which one is really better. So, in your opinion, which one do you think you could actually put the faster lap time down on?
I mean, you know, we talked about the power and what a big deal that is.
Right.
So if you ask me to produce a lap time, I think the Kawasaki is going to produce the lap time.
Right. And I would agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just think that that's just too much of a gap
Yeah.
to make up.
If we take the objective nature out of it for a second, because again, there really isn't a way around the additional power this makes, which one did you actually have more fun riding?
Yeah, and that's where we get into
What
what my preferences are. So this is just a fun motorcycle.
It is.
The characteristic of the engine,
Yeah.
the triple, and you know, we saw in the dyno, it's not more torque, but it's certainly more perceived torque.
Right.
This is just a lot more fun to ride.
Right.
You know, and I think the quick shifter also has a lot to do with that.
Yes, that is going to be a problem that we will just have to slowly work through over time when we'll finally get those maps.
Yep.
You know, the bin file definition support for those. We can handle that very quickly once that's available, but that could be a little while.
Yeah, and you know, if you had to ask me which one I would buy with my own money, it would be the MT-09 SP.
Right.
Because I think that the challenges that I was having with some of the front end feel on the brakes are going to be solved by the nicer components.
I do know they will be. The Generation 4 MT-09 suspension and brake components, even on the base model that came out in 2024, are leaps and bounds better than the prior third generation, and certainly much better than the older generation FC-09s. But going up to the SP model on this does give you a significantly better brake lever and feel, and a significantly better front fork. So I do agree. I think that if I were to have to buy one of these with my own money, that's funny. I have bought both of these with our own money. If I were to do it again, I would probably also agree and still get the MT-09 with the SP package on it, even though objectively the Kawasaki is better.
aftermarket parts,
Right.
that conversation starts to change.
Exactly, and that's where we can really muddy the waters here.
Yes.
Because those of you that have followed along our channel for a while know that we have done a mountain of testing on the Yamaha CP3. We've even helped out on a lot of levels that I still to this day cannot talk about publicly, but I did show some of the aftermarket camshaft support that's being developed for the CP3, and with the aftermarket cams, it completely closes the power gap.
100%.
They are instantaneously identical, and at that point, then this is very clearly the obvious choice. It's a little bit, though, of an unfair comparison because the CP3 now is used in two separate classes at the highest level of racing in this country. The CP3 is in the R9, which we've now all seen at Moto America and we've seen previously at World Supersport, and it is now also in the Super Hooligan class that Mark participates in. The Z900 is not allowed in that class, nor is it raced in any capacity whatsoever in this country. It doesn't have a class to belong in. So the aftermarket support for the Z900 is really going to pretty much stop at bolt-on modifications, whereas the engine components that are going to be available very shortly and are also already kind of available for the CP3 is going to be a completely different planet of aftermarket support.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, I think I agree with Mark. This is the better bike, but I'd probably still buy one of
Kind
those.
of more fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little bit more fun.
I think that pretty well covers it. I did say I was going to keep this video objective, and I think we did a pretty good job of doing that right up until the very end, because obviously people want to know still what our opinions are, and I don't like to share a lot of those in rider group comment sections or publicly, because at the end of the day, I've personally tuned thousands of both of these motorcycle ECUs, and as Mark said, neither of them are bad bikes. It's really hard to find a bad Japanese middleweight naked bike in these days, and clearly the numbers of how many have been sold for both the MT-09 and the D900 show that. Kawasaki and Yamaha have sold tens of thousands of both of them here in the North American market. They're both wildly popular and fantastic machines, but there's the objective opinion, and there's the subjective one.